The certified letter from Brenda Patterson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association in Scottsdale, Arizona, informed me that I was being fined $1,500 for painting my mailbox the wrong shade of beige. I stood in my driveway holding that letter, staring at my mailbox, which looked identical to every other mailbox on the block, and something inside me finally snapped. I'm Logan Fletcher, a software engineer who moved to this suburban nightmare 6 months ago when I got transferred to Phoenix. The house was perfect, the neighborhood looked quiet, and the realtor barely mentioned the HOA except to say it was very well organized. That should have been my first red flag. The fine started 2 weeks after I moved in. First, it was $50 because my garbage cans were visible from the street at 7:05 a.m. on a Tuesday. The pickup was at 7 o'clock a.m., and I had been walking out to retrieve them when Brenda herself pulled up in her white Lexus to take a photo. Then it was $200 because the landscaping company I hired planted petunias instead of pansies. Apparently, the approved flower list was on page 73 of the HOA bylaws, which ran to 214 pages of single-spaced text, but this mailbox fine was different. I had actually followed the rules this time. I had gone to the HOA office, requested the approved paint color list, waited 3 weeks for someone to email it to me, ordered the exact paint specified, and carefully repainted my mailbox on a Saturday morning. I had photographs, receipts, everything. I called the HOA office and got voicemail. I called again an hour later. Voicemail. I sent an email. No response for 3 days. When Brenda finally called me back, her voice had that particular tone that middle-aged women in positions of minor authority love to use. Mr. Fletcher, the paint you used is desert sand. The approved color is Sahara sand. They're completely different. They look identical, I said, keeping my voice level. That's irrelevant. The bylaws are very clear. You have 30 days to pay the fine or we'll place a lien on your property. I hung up and did what any reasonable person would do. I started reading the entire HOA bylaws document, all 214 pages of it. That's when things got interesting. The document was a mess. Contradictions everywhere, references to sections that didn't exist, obvious copy-paste errors from some generic template. But buried in Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 9, I found something that made my pulse quicken. The bylaws stated that all HOA board elections must follow Arizona state law regarding homeowner associations, and that all ballots must be witnessed by a neutral third party and kept on file for 7 years. I had never voted in an HOA election. I had never even been notified that one was happening. Brenda Patterson and her 3 board members, Susan Carmichael, Patricia Henderson, and Rita Morrison, had been in power for as long as anyone could remember, according to my neighbor Tom, who had lived here for 8 years. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office, which was really just a converted house at the entrance to the development. A bored-looking woman in her 20s sat at the reception desk scrolling through her phone. "I'd like to see the records from the last board election," I said. She looked up at me like I had asked her to explain quantum physics. "What? The HOA election? I want to see the ballots and voting records." "I don't know anything about that. Brenda handles all that stuff." "Is Brenda here?" "She comes in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Today's Monday." "Can you call her?" The receptionist sighed dramatically and picked up her phone, pressing a button. I heard it ring through the speaker. Voicemail. "She's not answering," the girl said, as if this resolved the matter completely. "I'll wait." "For what?" "For access to the election records." Arizona law requires HOAs to make their records available to homeowners within 10 business days of a written request. This is my written request. I placed a printed letter on her desk. She stared at the letter like it might bite her. "I'll have to give this to Brenda." "That's fine. The 10 days start now." I left feeling slightly better. I had worked in enough corporate environments to know how these things went. You documented everything, you followed the rules to the letter, and you made sure you had paper trails for days. 8 days later, I got an email from Brenda. "Dear Mr. Fletcher, the election records you requested are currently being digitized and will be available for review once that process is complete. We appreciate your patience." No timeline, no commitment, just a polite brush off. I replied immediately. "Dear Mrs. Patterson, Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1805 requires HOAs to produce records within 10 business days. Tomorrow is day 9. Please confirm what time I can review the records tomorrow or provide them electronically today." The response came within an hour. "Mr. Fletcher, we are a volunteer organization and are doing our best to accommodate your unusual request. The records will be available next Tuesday." That was another week away, well past the legal deadline. I spent that evening researching Arizona HOA law and discovered that homeowners could petition for oversight from the Arizona Department of Real Estate if an HOA violated state statutes. I filed a complaint online, detailing the refused records request and attaching all my email correspondence. The following Tuesday, I showed up at the HOA office at 9 a.m. sharp. The same receptionist was there, looking even more annoyed to see me. "I'm here to review the election records. Brenda's in the back. I'll tell her you're here." I waited for 20 minutes, then 30. Finally, Brenda emerged carrying a single manila folder that looked suspiciously thin. "Mr. Fletcher, so nice to see you." Her smile was pure ice. "I have the records right here. You can review them at that table." The folder contained exactly 12 pieces of paper. They were photocopies of what appeared to be ballot papers, each one with check marks next to Brenda Patterson, Susan Carmichael, Patricia Henderson, and Rita Morrison. There were no signatures, no witness attestations, no voter names, just 12 identical ballots with checkmarks. "Is this everything?" I asked. "That's the complete record of our last election." "When was this election?" 2 years ago in March." "There are 347 homes in this development. Where are the other ballots?" Brenda's expression didn't change. "Not everyone votes, Mr. Fletcher. We had 12 homeowners participate in that election." "And where are the witness signatures?" "Arizona law requires each ballot to be witnessed." "We're a small community organization. We do the best we can with limited resources." I took out my phone and photographed each page. Brenda's jaw tightened, but she didn't stop me. "I'd also like to see the records from the previous election." "That would have been 4 years ago. We only retain records for 2 years. The bylaws say 7 years. We updated that policy." "When?" "Last year." "You have documentation of that policy change. I'll have to check our files." I left with my photographs and a growing certainty that I had stumbled onto something bigger than a petty mailbox dispute. That evening, I created a spreadsheet. If there were 347 homes, and each home had at least one eligible voter, and the bylaws required a quorum of 30% for a valid election, then the HOA would have needed at least 105 votes to legally elect a board. They had 12 ballots. 12 identical, unwitnessed ballots. I started knocking on doors. My first stop was Tom, 2 houses down, who had lived here longer than almost anyone. "Did you vote in the HOA election 2 years ago?" I asked. Tom laughed. "Vote? I didn't even know there was an election. Brenda and her crew have been running things since before I moved here." "Did you ever get a ballot?" "Never." "Why?" I explained what I had found. Tom's expression shifted from amusement to anger. "You're telling me they've been fining us and making our lives miserable, and they were never even legally elected?" "That's what it looks like. But I need more evidence. Can you help me ask around?" Over the next 2 weeks, Tom and I talked to 73 homeowners. Not a single one had voted in the last election. Not one had received a ballot. Several people mentioned getting fines from Brenda's board, everything from lawn height violations to forbidden wind chimes to cars parked in driveways overnight. I compiled everything into a report and sent it to the Arizona Department of Real Estate. Then I posted about it on the Meadowbrook Hills Facebook group, which I had been lurking in but never posted to before. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of comments from homeowners sharing their own stories of mysterious fines, arbitrary rule enforcement, and complete lack of communication from the board. Several people mentioned that they had tried to run for the board themselves, but were told they had missed the filing deadline, even though they had never been notified when that deadline was. Janet Davies, who lived on Saguaro Court, posted, "I tried to get on the ballot 3 years ago. Brenda told me I needed signatures from 25 homeowners to qualify. I got 37 signatures and submitted them on time. She said they were invalid because I used the wrong form. She never showed me what the right form was." That comment got 42 likes and spawned another thread of similar stories. 2 days later, I got a cease and desist letter from the HOA's attorney, a man named Richard Kowalski. The letter informed me that I was spreading defamatory statements about the HOA board, violating my obligations as a homeowner, and creating a hostile environment in the community. I was ordered to remove my Facebook post and apologize publicly, or face legal action. I called my own attorney, a woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in real estate law. I had found her through a recommendation from a colleague at work. "Do they have a case?" I asked after explaining the situation. "Let me see everything you have," Sarah said. I sent her the photographs of the ballots, my spreadsheet of homeowner interviews, the bylaws, the email correspondence, everything. She called me back the next day. "Logan, this is bad, not for you, for them. If what you're saying is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt you, this board was never legally elected. Every decision they've made, every fine they've levied, every rule they've enforced, it's all potentially invalid. So what do I do? First, don't remove that Facebook post. You have a First Amendment right to discuss matters of public concern, and HOA governance absolutely qualifies. Second, file a formal complaint with the HOA demanding a new election under proper procedures. Third, we prepare for them to fight this tooth and nail." I followed Sarah's advice. The formal complaint was 5 pages long, citing specific violations of Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1805 through 33-1815, detailing the lack of proper ballots, witnesses, quorum, and notification. I requested an immediate new election supervised by an independent third party, and I requested that all fines levied by the current board be placed in suspension, pending resolution of the election validity question. I hand-delivered copies to Brenda's house, to each of the other board members, and to the HOA office. I also sent certified copies via mail for documentation purposes. The response came in the form of an emergency HOA meeting notice. It was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7:00 p.m. at the community center. The agenda had one item: discussion of false allegations against the board. I showed up 15 minutes early. The community center, usually empty except for the occasional yoga class, was packed. At least 100 homeowners had shown up, maybe more. I recognized Tom and several other people I had interviewed. Janet Davies was there with her husband. The room buzzed with conversation. Brenda sat at a table at the front with Susan, Patricia, and Rita. All four women looked tense. Brenda had a stack of papers in front of her and a microphone. At exactly 7 p.m., Brenda tapped the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. We've called this meeting to address some very serious and false accusations that have been made against your HOA board." "They're not false," someone shouted from the back. Brenda's face flushed. "If you'll let me speak, I'll explain everything. Mr. Fletcher has been spreading rumors that our last election was somehow invalid. This is completely untrue. We followed all proper procedures." I raised my hand. "May I respond? This is not a debate, Mr. Fletcher." "Actually," Sarah said from beside me, I hadn't even noticed her come in. "Under Arizona law and your own bylaws, homeowners have the right to speak at HOA meetings. You can set reasonable time limits, but you can't refuse to let him speak." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine. 2 minutes." I stood up. "I requested the records from the last election. The HOA provided 12 photocopied ballots with no signatures, no witness attestations, and no voter identification. I've spoken to 73 homeowners. None of them voted. None of them received ballots. Arizona law requires ballots to be properly witnessed and requires a quorum of 30% of homeowners. That's 105 votes for our community. The board has produced 12 unwitnessed ballots." The room erupted in conversation. Several people started shouting questions at the board. Brenda banged a gavel. "That's enough. Mr. Fletcher doesn't understand how HOAs work. We sent ballots to every homeowner. It's not our fault if people didn't return them." "Do you have proof of mailing?" Sarah asked. "We don't have to prove anything to you. You're not even a homeowner here." "I'm Mr. Fletcher's attorney. And yes, you do have to provide proof. May I see the mailing records? We don't keep those." "You keep ballots for only 2 years despite your bylaws requiring 7. You don't keep mailing records, and you can't produce a single witnessed ballot. Mrs. Patterson, I think you know where this is heading." Brenda stood up, her face now fully red. "This meeting is over. Everyone needs to leave." "You can't just end a meeting," Tom called out. "We want answers." "I'm calling the police," Brenda said. "For what?" Janet Davies stood up. "We're homeowners asking legitimate questions at an HOA meeting. That's our right." Susan Carmichael leaned over and whispered something to Brenda. The two of them had a hurried, hushed conversation. Then Brenda sat back down. "Fine. Here's what actually happened. 2 years ago, we did send out ballots. We got very few responses. Rather than go through the expensive process of a full election, we made a practical decision. We filled out enough ballots to meet the technical requirement and moved forward. We've been serving this community for years, making sure property values stay high and the neighborhood looks good." The room went dead silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had just admitted to election fraud in front of 100 witnesses. "You forged ballots," someone said. "We did what was necessary to keep this community running," Brenda said. "If we had waited for people to actually participate, nothing would get done." Sarah was typing on her phone, I assume taking notes. Several other people had their phones out too. "Mrs. Patterson," Sarah said carefully, "are you saying that you and the other board members filled out ballots yourselves?" "I'm saying we did what we had to do. And frankly, this community should be thanking us. Do you know how much work it is to manage an HOA? The complaints we deal with, the decisions we make, all as volunteers." "That doesn't give you the right to fake an election," I said. "We didn't fake anything. We're the board. We've always been the board. This is just a technicality." Patricia Henderson, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Brenda, maybe we should talk to a lawyer before we say anything else. We have a lawyer, Brenda snapped, and he'll handle this. This meeting is adjourned. The 4 board members gathered their things and left through a side door. The rest of us sat in stunned silence for a moment before the room exploded in conversation. Sarah pulled me aside. "Did you record that?" "No, I didn't think to." "Doesn't matter." Half the room had their phones out, and she admitted to ballot fraud in front of witnesses. "This is bigger than I thought. What happens now?" "Now we file complaints with every relevant authority. The Department of Real Estate, the County Recorder's Office, and possibly the Attorney General. What they did isn't just a violation of HOA bylaws. Forging election ballots, even in a private organization, could potentially be criminal fraud." Over the next week, everything accelerated. The story got picked up by a local news station after Janet Davies contacted them. A reporter named Michelle Torres came out to interview several homeowners, including me. The segment aired on the Friday evening news. A Scottsdale HOA is in turmoil tonight after allegations that its board members forged election ballots. Michelle said on camera, standing in front of the Meadowbrook Hills entrance sign. Homeowners say they never received ballots, and the board president admits to filling out ballots herself to meet legal requirements. They played a clip from the community meeting where Brenda said, "We filled out enough ballots to meet the technical requirement and moved forward." The segment ended with Michelle saying, "The Arizona Attorney General's office says it is reviewing the matter. For now, homeowners here are left wondering who's really in charge of their neighborhood." That Sunday, I got a knock on my door. It was Brenda, alone, looking smaller somehow than she had at the meeting. "Can we talk?" she asked. I almost said no, but curiosity got the better of me. "Sure." We sat on my front porch. She looked exhausted. "I've been managing this HOA for 12 years, she said. "My husband left me, my kids live across the country, and this was the one thing I was good at. The one place where people needed me. So you forged ballots to stay in power." I didn't think of it like that. I thought of it as keeping things running. Do you know how hard it is to get people to care about HOA governance? Nobody wants to volunteer. Nobody wants to serve on the board. They just want to complain when their neighbor's lawn is too long or someone parks an RV on the street. That doesn't make what you did legal. I know. She was quiet for a moment. "I want to make this right. What if we hold a new election, a real one with proper ballots and witnesses and everything? We can reset the whole thing." "That should have happened 2 years ago. Actually, 4 years ago, and probably before that too." "I know. But we can fix it now. I'll resign. We'll all resign. We'll work with a professional management company to run a proper election." "What about the fines? The thousands of dollars you've collected from people over the years?" She hesitated. "What if we refund this year's fines?" "We can't go back further than that. The HOA doesn't have that much money in reserves." I thought about it. "I'll talk to the other homeowners. But Brenda, this isn't up to just me. You admitted to fraud in front of 100 people. The Attorney General might have something to say about this." "I know." She stood up to leave. "For what it's worth, I really was trying to help the neighborhood. I just lost sight of what that meant." After she left, I called Sarah and then Tom. We set up a meeting with Janet and several other active homeowners for Monday evening. 15 people showed up at Tom's house, cramming into his living room. "Brenda came to me and offered to resign," I explained. "She wants to hold a new election and refund this year's fines." "What about my $1,500 from last year?" someone asked. "Or my $1,000 from 2 years ago?" another voice added. "She says the HOA doesn't have the money to go back further than 1 year. Janet shook her head. "That's not good enough. She can't commit fraud and then negotiate her way out of consequences." "I agree," I said. but I wanted to hear what everyone thinks, because this affects all of us. We talked for 2 hours. Opinions were divided. Some people just wanted Brenda gone and wanted to move forward. Others wanted full accountability, including criminal charges if applicable. A few people worried that if we pushed too hard, we'd end up in expensive litigation that would drain the HOA reserves and result in special assessments for everyone. In the end, we agreed on a plan. We would accept the resignations and organize a new election, but we wouldn't drop the complaints with the state. We'd let the authorities decide whether criminal charges were warranted. And we'd demand a full forensic audit of the HOA finances to see where all the fine money had gone. Sarah drafted a formal response to Brenda's offer. The board members would resign immediately. A professional management company would be hired to run the HOA and organize a proper election within 60 days. All fines from the past 2 years would be refunded or credited against HOA dues. And the board members would cooperate fully with any investigations. Brenda tried to negotiate the terms. She wanted the resignations to be effective in 30 days, not immediately. She wanted only 1 year of fines refunded. She balked at the forensic audit. "You don't get to negotiate," Sarah told her in an email. "You committed fraud. You admitted it publicly. Either you accept these terms or we proceed with civil litigation and push for criminal prosecution. Your choice." On a Wednesday afternoon, I got a call from Sarah. They accepted. All 4 board members submitted resignation letters this morning. I've already been in contact with 3 management companies that specialize in HOA transitions. We should have someone hired by next week. The management company we selected was called Desert Community Management. They assigned a representative named Mark Sullivan, a calm professional in his 50s who had managed over 30 HOA transitions. His first action was to schedule a town hall meeting for all homeowners. 200 people showed up. Mark stood at the front and explained the process. Ballots would be mailed to every homeowner at their address of record. Homeowners would have 30 days to return them. Each ballot would be placed in a sealed envelope with a signed witness attestation. The witness could be any adult who wasn't running for the board. The ballots would be collected and counted by a neutral third party, specifically an accounting firm that specialized in election services. Anyone who wants to run for the board needs to submit a nomination form by next Friday, Mark said. You'll need signatures from 10 homeowners supporting your candidacy. We have 5 open positions. And I want to be very clear. This will be a legitimate, legally compliant election. Everything will be documented and transparent. 12 people ended up running for the 5 board positions, including Tom and Janet. I thought about running myself, but decided I had done enough by exposing the fraud. I just wanted to live in my house and not get fined for nonsense. The election took 45 days from start to finish. The accounting firm counted 293 returned ballots. Tom won the most votes, followed by Janet and 3 other homeowners I didn't know well. The results were posted on a new HOA website that Mark's company had set up, along with scanned copies of the vote tallies. At the first official meeting of the new board, Tom was elected president. His first motion was to review all existing fines and rule violations. The board spent 3 hours going through cases, and they ended up dismissing about 60% of them as frivolous or inconsistently enforced. My mailbox fine was dismissed. So was the fine for my garbage cans and the one for the petunias. But the story wasn't over. 3 months after the new board took office, I got a call from an investigator with the Arizona Attorney General's office. His name was Detective Raymond Price, and he wanted to talk about Brenda Patterson. We met at a coffee shop near my office. Detective Price was a serious man with graying hair and a notebook that he flipped through as we talked. "I've been reviewing the complaint you filed and the evidence you gathered," he said. "I've also been looking into the HOA's financial records. Can you tell me about the audit you requested?" The new board hired an accounting firm. They found some irregularities, but nothing that seemed criminal. Some questionable expenses, poor record keeping, that sort of thing. Did they find any payments to Brenda Patterson or the other board members? The board positions are supposed to be volunteer, so no. What about payments to companies owned by the board members? I hadn't heard about that. Not that I know of. Why? Detective Price pulled out a document. We found that Brenda Patterson owns a landscaping company called Desert Bloom Landscaping. Over the past 5 years, the HOA paid that company over $200,000 for common area maintenance. Is that unusual? Not necessarily. Except the work was billed at rates significantly higher than market rate, and there's no evidence that competitive bids were ever solicited, which is required under your HOA bylaws for contracts over $10,000. So she was funneling HOA money to her own company. That's what it looks like. Susan Carmichael also owns a property management company that received consulting fees from the HOA. Patricia Henderson's husband owns a painting company that did work on the community center. We're still tracing all the connections. I felt my stomach drop. This was way more than just fake ballots. Election fraud, embezzlement, self-dealing, breach of fiduciary duty. We're building a case, but it takes time. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to testify if this goes to trial. Absolutely. Over the following months, Detective Price and his team interviewed dozens of homeowners and subpoenaed financial records. The investigation expanded to include the landscaping company's records, bank statements, and contracts. 8 months after the first community meeting where Brenda admitted to forging ballots, she and Susan Carmichael were arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Patricia Henderson was charged with lesser offenses for her role in the scheme. Rita Morrison, the fourth board member, was offered immunity in exchange for her testimony. It turned out she had objected to some of what was happening, but had been intimidated into going along with it. The case went to trial 14 months after my initial records request. I testified for about 2 hours, explaining how I had discovered the fake ballots and what had happened at the community meeting. Janet testified about her attempts to run for the board and being blocked. Tom testified about never receiving election materials. The prosecutor presented financial records showing the flow of money from the HOA to companies owned by Brenda and Susan. Rita Morrison testified that Brenda had told her, "If anyone asks, we'll just say we did our best and nobody else wanted to serve. They can't prove we didn't send out ballots." The jury deliberated for 3 days. Brenda was convicted on all counts. Susan was convicted on the financial charges but acquitted on some of the election-related charges. Patricia took a plea deal before the trial ended. Brenda was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay restitution of over $300,000. Susan got 12 months and similar restitution. Patricia got probation and community service. The civil suits took even longer. Multiple homeowners, myself included, filed a class action lawsuit against Brenda, Susan, and Patricia personally for the fines they had collected over the years. That case settled 2 years after everything started. We got most of our money back, though the lawyers took a big chunk. Through it all, the new HOA board, led by Tom and Janet, worked to rebuild trust in the community. They simplified the bylaws, cutting them from 214 pages to 43 pages. They created an online portal where homeowners could submit maintenance requests and track violations. They required competitive bidding for all contracts and published monthly financial statements. Most importantly, they focused on actual community building instead of rule enforcement. They organized neighborhood barbecues and a holiday party. They created a volunteer committee to help elderly residents with yard work. They installed a playground that kids actually used. My life returned to something resembling normal. I could paint my mailbox without fear. I could put my garbage cans out without checking my watch. I could plant whatever flowers I wanted. 3 years after that first certified letter about my beige mailbox, I was sitting on my porch on a Saturday morning when Janet walked by with her dog. "How's retirement from the board treating you?" I asked. She had stepped down after 2 terms, feeling like she had done her part. "It's nice to just be a regular homeowner again," she said. "Though I'm glad we did what we did. Can you imagine if you had just paid that mailbox fine and moved on?" I think about that sometimes. I almost did pay it. I was just so frustrated that I had followed the rules and still got punished. It's funny how these things work. You were annoyed about paint colors and you ended up uncovering a whole criminal enterprise. "Brenda gets out in 4 months, I said. I had been following the case through the court system. She got time off for good behavior. I also heard she moved out of state after she sold her house. Good riddance. After Janet continued her walk, I sat thinking about everything that had happened. The investigation, the trials, the community meetings, the stress and anger and eventual resolution. It had consumed 2 years of my life, but it had been worth it. My phone buzzed with a message from the HOA. It was the monthly newsletter, now actually monthly and actually useful. It had updates on the community pool renovation, a reminder about the upcoming neighborhood yard sale, and a notice that the annual HOA election would be held in 6 weeks. The election notice included detailed instructions on how to request a ballot, how to get it properly witnessed, and when and where the ballots would be counted. Everything was transparent, documented, and legal. I thought about running for the board myself this time. I had learned a lot about HOA governance, and I had ideas about how to make things even better. But then, I thought about the time commitment, and the meetings and the inevitable conflicts with homeowners who would be upset about one thing or another. Maybe next year. Instead, I spent that Saturday afternoon doing exactly what I wanted to do in my own house that I owned. I planted some tomatoes in the backyard, knowing that vegetable gardens were now explicitly permitted under the updated bylaws. I washed my car in the driveway, something that used to be forbidden but was now allowed. I even moved my garbage cans to the side of the house at 10 o'clock a.m. instead of 7 o'clock a.m., because the new rule was just that they had to be out of sight by noon on collection day. Small freedoms, maybe. But they mattered. Tom stopped by that evening with a 6-pack of beer. We sat on my porch and watched the sun set over the neighborhood. "You ever regret starting all this?" he asked. "Not for a second. You?" "Nah, though I do sometimes miss the days when I could just ignore the HOA completely." "You could resign from the board." "I could. But someone's got to make sure we don't end up with another Brenda. Might as well be me." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our beers and watching neighbors walk their dogs and kids ride bikes in the street. "Hey, Logan." "Yeah." "Thanks for not just paying the fine and moving on, for giving a damn when a lot of people wouldn't have. Thanks for helping. I couldn't have done it alone." More silence. Then Tom said, "So are you going to run for the board this year?" I laughed. "Are you trying to get me to help with the workload?" "Maybe. It's a lot of meetings." "I'll think about it." But I already knew the answer was no. I had done my part. I had exposed the fraud, pushed for accountability, and helped create a better system. Now I just wanted to live my life without thinking about HOA politics every day. The new board was functional and honest. The bylaws were reasonable. The community was actually becoming a community instead of just a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. That was enough. A few weeks later, I was working from home when I got an email from Michelle Torres, the news reporter who had covered the original story. She was doing a follow-up piece about HOA reform in Arizona and wanted to interview me. We met at the same coffee shop where I had met Detective Price. Michelle had her cameraman with her, and they set up for the interview outside with the Scottsdale Mountains in the background. "So 3 years after you first requested those election records, what's changed?" Michelle asked. "Everything," I said. "We have a legitimate board elected by actual homeowners. The bylaws are reasonable. The community is better. And I think other HOAs in Arizona are paying attention. The state legislature is considering new laws that would require independent oversight of HOA elections." "Do you think that's necessary?" "Absolutely. What happened in my neighborhood probably happens in a lot of places. Small groups of people get into power and stay there because nobody's paying attention. Making the process transparent and verified by third parties protects everyone." "What would you say to other homeowners who are dealing with HOA problems?" I thought about that. "Don't just complain. Document everything. Know your rights under state law, and don't be afraid to ask questions and demand accountability. These organizations control your property and collect your money. You have every right to know how they're being run." The segment aired that week. I got emails and messages from people across Arizona and even other states telling me about their own HOA nightmares. Some of them were worse than mine. Stories of foreclosures over minor violations, boards that wouldn't hold elections at all, financial mismanagement that drained reserves and left communities in disrepair. I couldn't help all of them, but I shared what I had learned. I sent them copies of the Arizona statutes that governed HOAs. I explained how to file complaints with the Department of Real Estate. I connected them with Sarah, who had started taking on more HOA cases after seeing how much need there was for attorneys who understood this area of law. One woman from Tucson told me she had requested election records from her HOA and discovered the same pattern I had found. Minimal ballots, no witnesses, no documentation. She was now organizing her neighbors to demand a new election. A man from Mesa found that his HOA board had been paying one member's company for maintenance work without competitive bidding. He filed a complaint with the Attorney General's office, and they opened an investigation. These stories reminded me why all of this had mattered. It wasn't really about my mailbox or even about Brenda's fraud. It was about the principle that people in positions of power, even small local power, need to be accountable to the people they serve. 4 years after everything started, I was finally ready to move on completely. The new HOA board was functioning well under new leadership. Tom had stepped down after serving 2 full terms, and a younger couple had taken over as president and vice president. They were doing great work, focused on maintaining property values while respecting homeowners' rights. I got a job offer from a tech company in Austin, Texas. It was a good opportunity, a significant raise, and a chance to live somewhere new. Part of me wanted to stay in Scottsdale, in the house I had fought so hard to live in peacefully. But another part of me was ready for a fresh start. Before I put my house on the market, I made sure the buyer would know what they were getting into. I gave them copies of the updated bylaws, explained the history of the HOA issues and how they had been resolved, and introduced them to several neighbors. I wanted them to feel confident that they were moving into an actual community, not a dictatorship. The house sold quickly. Property values in Meadowbrook Hills had actually gone up after the HOA reforms, which was ironic. Brenda had always justified her strict enforcement by saying it protected property values, but apparently what people really valued was reasonable governance and a sense of community. On my last day in Scottsdale, I drove through the neighborhood one final time. The streets were clean, the common areas were well maintained, and kids were playing in that new playground. Several people waved as I drove past. It looked like a nice place to live. I thought about that first day when I got the fine for my mailbox, how angry and helpless I had felt. How a simple decision to fight back instead of paying up had led to investigations, trials, news coverage, and ultimately real change. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance matter more than we know. As I merged onto the highway toward Texas, I got a text from Tom. Safe travels. Thanks for everything. If you ever need an HOA reference for your next place, let me know. I smiled and texted back. Thanks, though honestly, I'm thinking about renting for a while. He sent back a laughing emoji. My new place in Austin was a condo in a building with professional management, clear rules, and no power-hungry volunteers running things like personal fiefdoms. It was smaller than my Scottsdale house, but I didn't have to worry about mailbox colors or garbage timing. Still, I stayed in touch with people from Meadowbrook Hills. Janet sent me updates about the neighborhood. Sarah occasionally forwarded me news articles about other HOA fraud cases in Arizona. The reforms that had been proposed in the state legislature actually passed, requiring independent verification of HOA elections and regular financial audits. In a small way, my mailbox fine had helped change the law. 5 years after everything started, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post from someone in the old Meadowbrook Hills Facebook group. It was a photo from the neighborhood's annual summer party. Hundreds of people in the park, kids running around, adults chatting and laughing. The caption read, "Best community event yet. So grateful for everyone who fought to make this neighborhood what it is today." Several people had commented, tagging me and Tom and Janet and others who had been involved in exposing the fraud and pushing for change. One comment said, "I moved here 2 years ago and I can't imagine what it must have been like before. Thank you to everyone who stood up and made this place better." That comment made everything worth it. The stress, the meetings, the investigations, the time and energy spent fighting for something that should have been basic and simple. Honest, accountable governance. I had learned something important through all of this. Most people want to avoid conflict. They'll pay unfair fines, follow unreasonable rules, and accept bad governance because fighting back seems too hard or too risky. And most of the time, the people in power count on that. They count on apathy and exhaustion and the assumption that nothing will ever change. But sometimes, one person who's just annoyed enough about the wrong thing at the wrong time can start something bigger. They can ask the questions nobody else is asking. They can demand the accountability nobody else is demanding. And they can inspire other people to do the same. I never set out to be some kind of HOA reformer. I just wanted to paint my mailbox without getting fined. But by refusing to accept an unjust fine, by digging into the bylaws and state law, by asking for records and talking to neighbors, I stumbled into something much larger. And in the end, a whole community was better for it. Looking back now, I wouldn't change anything. Well, maybe I would have chosen a different color for the mailbox in the first place. But everything that came after, all the fighting and frustration and eventual victory, that was worth it. Because governance matters, even at the smallest levels. Especially at the smallest levels, where most people assume nobody's paying attention. I paid attention, and it made all the difference. The story of Meadowbrook Hills became something of a legend in HOA reform circles. I occasionally got invited to speak at community meetings or homeowner rights conferences. I always said the same thing: know your rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to challenge authority when authority is wrong. Some people took that advice. I heard from dozens of homeowners over the years who successfully challenged their HOAs, demanded proper elections, exposed financial mismanagement, and created better communities. Others didn't. They paid their fines, followed unreasonable rules, and hoped things would somehow get better without anyone having to do anything difficult. I understood both responses. Fighting back is exhausting. It takes time and energy and sometimes money. Not everyone is in a position to take on that kind of battle, but for those who can, who have the resources and the stubbornness and the righteous anger to push back against petty tyranny, it's worth it. Because at the end of the day, HOAs are supposed to serve homeowners, not the other way around. They're supposed to maintain property values and common areas, not create little kingdoms for people who want power without accountability. When they forget that, they need to be reminded. Firmly, persistently, and with full documentation. That's what I did. That's what Tom and Janet and dozens of other Meadowbrook Hills residents did. And that's what homeowners everywhere can do when they face similar situations. It starts with one person refusing to accept injustice, even over something as small as a mailbox. It starts with asking questions. It starts with demanding proof. It starts with knowing that the rules apply to everyone, including the people making the rules. And sometimes, if you're persistent enough and lucky enough and have enough neighbors who are equally fed up, it leads to real change. That's my story. That's how I proved the HOA election was never valid. Not one ballot was properly witnessed, and how that discovery brought down a corrupt board and created something better in its place. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick, but it was absolutely worth it. And if I had to do it all over again, knowing everything I know now about the time and stress and complications it would involve, I would make the same choice. I would ask for those election records. I would count those 12 pathetic ballots. I would knock on those doors and organize those meetings and file those complaints. Because some things are worth fighting for, even if they start with something as ridiculous as the wrong shade of beige on a mailbox.